So good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to this joint work session with the Coward County Board of Commissioners and the Coward County Planning Commission. We'd like to start tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, good evening, everyone. Tonight I have with me Commissioner Mark Cox, Commissioner Todd Ireland, Vice President Commissioner Catherine Grasso, and Commissioner Mike Hart. First action we need to do is approve and adopt the agenda.
So I move we approve and adopt the agenda as submitted with public comment.
Second.
Have a motion to second that we approve and adopt the agenda as submitted to include public comment. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Madam Chair?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Bueller, and I am joined tonight by Vice Chair Kernan, Commissioner Freeland, Commissioner Gadway, Commissioner Williams, and Commissioner Toohey. We also need a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Commissioner Kernan,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Freeland. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
Good
evening.
Rachel O'Shea, Zoning Planner with Department of Planning and Zoning. With me is Will Hager, Planner 3. This evening, we have a joint work session regarding the zoning ordinance update. There we go. Introduction. Initial work session was done in April of 2023, which gave an overview of the zoning ordinance, the purpose, strategy, and goals for this update. The draft zoning ordinance was made available to the public in May of 2023. And joint work session and a public forum was held in June of 2023 on the draft zoning districts and the draft zoning map. Since then, we've had joint work sessions between the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. They will continue on a monthly basis as we review draft articles of the proposed zoning ordinance. Public forums are also scheduled each month to allow the public to ask questions and comment on the proposed articles. Planning and zoning staff in between have been meeting with representatives from several organizations as well as citizens. Questions and comments received have been used to create an FAQ section on our website for the zoning ordinance update. You can find that at the link on the screen. On the webpage also includes the draft articles, the draft zoning map, and this is also where you can submit public comment and other submittal materials. We've also recently updated the schedule to include all of the 2024 dates after receiving the approved schedules for the Board of County Commissioners and Planning Commission. The focus of this evening's joint work session are draft Articles 26, outdoor lighting, Article 27, parking, and Articles 28, landscaping. And I'm going to turn it over to Will to walk us through the overview of the articles and our major changes.
Thank you, Rachel, and good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, Article 26 includes county standards and regulations addressing outdoor lighting. And this section was reviewed by county staff with expertise in lighting in our inspections and permits division. And most of the revisions that were made came at the recommendation of county staff with that expertise. Article 26 includes provisions addressing the purpose, applicability, and exemptions for outdoor lighting standards. Some of the revisions that were made to this article include providing outdoor lighting that is dark sky friendly to the purpose section. Provisions were added making it clear that lighting used for signaling purposes and emergency lighting are exempt. And there are and where the article addresses temporary lighting, that's exempt. Temporary has been defined as lasting no longer than 180 days. Article 26 includes standards for lighting levels, lighting design, control of nuisance and disabling glare, and installation, as well as provisions for plan submissions and modifications. And for more details on revisions that were made to this article, we've created a document which compares draft articles 26, 27, and 28 with the current zoning ordinance, which is available on the zoning ordinance update website. So draft Article 27, parking, this includes provisions for the location of all-street parking and design standards, minimum required parking spaces for specific uses, shared parking in all street loading facilities, bicycle parking and electric vehicle charging stations, and commercial and recreational vehicle storage. The draft parking article includes provisions addressing design standards for parking structures, and these have been added to the draft zoning ordinance. These include things like requirements that parking structures be designed to minimize blank exterior walls and mask interior ramps through architectural detail or public art and landscape. Decorative fencing and landscape is required to screen parking spaces on the ground floor, and vehicular clear sight zones included at vehicular exit areas. The minimum required off-street parking spaces for specific uses have mostly been left unchanged in this draft, with a few exceptions. One example of a use where the requirement was revised is for the minimum required parking spaces for places of worship. Under the current regulations, the requirement is 1 parking space per 4 seats of maximum seating capacity in the main assembly hall, and 1 space per 200 square feet of the parish hall, whichever is greater. There were planning and zoning staff that did not feel this would be sufficient, and there were buildings considered accessory to the main assembly area that aren't part of the parish hall, like gymnasiums, for instance, that were falling through the cracks and not being included in this calculation. So in the draft, this has been revised so that the requirement would now be 1 parking space per 4 seats of maximum seating capacity in the main assembly area, plus 1 space per 300 square feet of gross floor area in accessory buildings or expansions to existing buildings not part of the main assembly area.
So, Will, I have a question. So we were just at Mako, and there was some discussion at Mako about reducing parking requirements for large commercial retail facilities. Do you know have had any discussions about that?
We've had discussions about that, and I think that's something that we're going to take another look at before we solidify the draft, after we take feedback and public input into consideration. I think that that's a general trend across the country. I think it's emphasized a little bit more in more urban environments and maybe less so in more exurban environments, but I think it's definitely something that's worth taking a close look at during this process. So it's something that has been discussed and will be considered before we solidify the next draft. But just speaking in terms of the May 2023 draft, no, those decisions hadn't been made at that time.
Because if you ride around our county, you look at the shopping centers, you see a lot of empty parking spaces.
Yeah, I think it's fair to point that out, and
Unless it's Christmas time.
Well, yeah, but
yeah, it's
you
something.
can't design for 1 day or 1 week a year. You know, that's not efficient. 'Cause
Right, and it's something that we're going to take another look at, and it's something that probably deserves to be looked at on a use-by-use basis.
it's just a lot of impervious surface that's not really being used.
Especially with the trend of online. You're seeing brick and mortar taking a beating year after year after year, so it's just not the wave of the future. So to have these huge battlefields of parking spaces.
When you take a look at it, what will you take into consideration? Trends?
Trends, I think that our planning staff have also, they've had a lot of experience reviewing projects and seeing what those projects look like in terms of maybe the anticipated parking usage and what it looks like in reality. I think if you look at the actual chart, it's a huge chart, so it can be a little bit overwhelming at first. But I think that there probably are specific uses that can be isolated and really evaluated, and we could do research on and figure out if adjustments can be made.
Well, like Commissioner Hans's point, do we go out to the anchor stores and say, hey, what's your head count looking like this year opposed to last year or so, and get data from there? I mean, we only have a handful of shopping centers.
That sounds like something that could be done.
Mhm.
You know, you don't have to hit all the little shops, but you hit the anchor store and, you know, they have all that data. You know, they have their head count, so.
Yeah, I think that would tell you a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So the section addressing off-street loading requirements has been revised. All industrial, wholesale, manufacturing, warehousing, or storage uses must provide at least one loading area in the draft. Under the current ordinance, if these uses consist of less than 2,000 square feet, they aren't required to provide a loading area at all. And all commercial retail uses and business and personal service uses that receive products or make shipments must provide at least one loading area in the draft. Under the current ordinance, this requirement only applies to retail commercial uses, and retail commercial uses that consist of less than 25,000 square feet aren't required to provide a loading area at all.
And sorry to stop you on that, so in a lot of these shopping centers, you have store. Their only loading area is actually right in front of that place. So are you taking that into consideration, especially you take 3 or 4 little restaurants that are side by side, they're getting an 18-wheeler truck, it dominates the whole thing. So when you look at it, you need to take that into consideration, because they don't have particularly a marked area, because it's a throughway, but it's a reality of that is the only thing they got. I mean, if you look at a dry cleaners, you know what I mean? It's a 1,000 square foot or 2,000 square foot building, but you know, they get deliveries or what have you, or a pizza joint. So just kind of keep that in mind, especially because that loading zone gets touchy.
Right, that's exactly why we're proposing the change here, because under the current ordinance, there was a lot of businesses that were being missed where it wasn't a requirement because of the threshold. So we've reduced that drastically so that we're gonna be more projects that come through the door are gonna be required to not have one and have it labeled on the site plan.
Okay,
So we make
okay,
sure that
gotcha.
it's gonna
Good,
be
good.
put in.
Good, okay.
And the liquor stores need armored truck parking, 'cause trucks are there every day picking up cash. Right, Commissioner Hart?
Only Commissioner Hans's store, only his.
If I had one.
I thought you had to have one to be here.
Okay, parking reductions. Section 6-301E from the current zoning ordinance was not included in the draft zoning ordinance. This section states, in regard to non-residential parking, that the Planning Commission administrator may allow up to 15% of the required number of parking spaces be reserved for construction in the future and/or designated as overflow parking. Furthermore, the policy from the current zoning ordinance is that an administrative variance can be requested to reduce the required parking up to 15% if the site cannot accommodate the additional parking spaces as required by section 6-301E. In the draft zoning ordinance, an administrative variance may still be requested to reduce required parking for non-residential development by 15%. And we went over that provision a little bit last month. And bicycle parking. The provisions addressing required bicycle parking have been revised. In the draft zoning ordinance, a minimum of 2 bicycle parking spaces or 1 bicycle parking space for every 5,000 square feet of retail or office space is required, whichever is greater. a minimum of 2 bicycle parking spaces or 1 bicycle parking space for every 2,500 square feet of institutional space is required, whichever is greater, and a minimum of 1 bicycle parking space for every 5 dwelling units in multifamily residential developments is required. These provisions would replace the current requirements, which are that bicycle racks with a space for a minimum of 10 bicycles are required for every 100,000 square feet of retail space, every 50,000 square feet of office space, and every 50 units of multifamily. So this revision would be strengthening those requirements a bit.
So how big is a bicycle parking space?
I didn't break out my measuring stick on that one. That's a good question.
It's 2 per
Are they-
space, right? Isn't that how you measure it out? Isn't it 2 per parking space?
2 for a car parking space?
Yeah, that's what I thought, right? Or no, or is it tighter than that?
Or is it actually bike racks?
Yeah, we're talking about bike
Oh, you're doing the
racks.
bike, bike
Right.
racks.
Racks.
That's a lot of bike racks though, right? I mean, what was that space again? You said how many? 2,500 square feet's not a lot of area.
5,000.
Or am I, 2 for every 5,000?
It's a minimum of 2, so that's the minimum, and then 1 bicycle parking space per 5,000 or per 2,500.
Ride that many bikes in the county, huh? Some fit people, boy.
Well, it's
We'll get there,
it's a nice goal to have.
yeah.
And electric vehicle charging stations. So the provisions addressing electric vehicle charging stations have been revised. Under the current zoning ordinance, an incentive to reduce the required number of parking spaces by 2 spaces is available for parking areas requiring 50 or more spaces when an electric vehicle charging device is provided to serve a minimum of 2 vehicles. In the draft zoning ordinance, these regulations have been revised so that for parking facilities that require 25 to 49 spaces, when electric vehicle charging stations are installed that serve a minimum of 2 parking spaces, the minimum required number of parking spaces may be reduced by 2. For parking facilities that require 50 or more spaces, electric vehicle charging stations that serve a minimum of 4 vehicles shall be provided. If more than the required amount of electric vehicle charging stations are provided, then the minimum required number of parking spaces may be reduced by the amount of parking spaces that can be served by the additional charging stations not to exceed 10% of the minimum required number of parking spaces. And there are other approaches that you could take for these type of requirements. A different approach might be to have a certain percentage of the required parking spaces be dedicated to electric vehicle charging stations for specific uses. And I don't know what the right percentage would be, but just throwing some numbers out there, maybe something like 10% of the required parking spaces for multifamily residential development, maybe 5% for grocery stores, maybe some uses are exempt. So there are different directions that you could take if the county decides it wants to have some kind of requirement. But really, before we get into the weeds going down that road, I think what we're looking for at this point is some feedback on whether a requirement is something the county wants us to pursue at a concept level.
That's a big expense. It's a real
Indeed.
big expense. I mean, you talk about renting places, that's a real big expense, because you know who's gonna pay that rent, is every tenant in that place. And I don't have no clue what it cost in that infrastructure to start it out, but to run those lines out there and then who pays that electric bill, where's that charged, I don't know. I mean, I'm just one voice here, but, better put a lot of thought into that before you make that a requirement. I don't know what other jurisdictions are doing for that, but, that's not one just to lightly blow past. That's a big bill.
Do I see this as a minimum of 4 spots are required, or 4 electric vehicle charging stations have to be provided if 50 or more spaces are required?
That is correct. That is the provision as it's currently written, but like I said, we're really looking for feedback at this point, whether this is something that the county would like us to pursue, and I think Commissioner Hart makes some good points. I think this is something that really, whether it's something that we pursue is something that we have to put a lot of thought into, if that's a requirement that makes sense.
Are
And-
grants still available for EV stations?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would imagine that there is some funding available out there somewhere.
So as far as I know, the county has not ever paid for one, that there were grants available to install EV at some of the public parking areas.
So I think the ones that we have so far have been paid for by the electric provider because they charge, so they get reimbursed. So we haven't had to pay to put any in so far. I don't know
I thought
how
it was a
that.
state grant too at one point too, that we had at some of those parking rides at one point. And I don't wanna misspeak, but was it? Okay, I remember something like when we had the parking rides.
What is a parking facility?
A parking lot.
A parking lot, okay.
So Will, a charging station, is that a parking spot? Or is it just a
yes,
place you charge your car and you move on?
It's both. A charging station would also count towards, the charging station is, you park your car in the parking space and you also hook it up and you get your charge, and that parking space would be counted towards your minimum parking requirement.
Because could you imagine if you were a pizza parlor and say you were responsible for a percentage of that? People come in at night, plug their car in, you're paying the electric to
No.
charge their car.
No,
so
you're
they'll
not.
Huh?
No, they pay.
Well, if you're making it a requirement of the shopping center though, the shopping center has to put it in, then they may not be through that, I mean, right? I mean, who pays for that electric?
The person that's charging the car. When you charge your car, you put your credit card in there and they bill you.
Oh, it's got a credit card.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Well-
Oh, yeah, the electric ain't free.
Okay, so when I see like some of these ones at these drugstores and stuff, those are credit card, huh?
Yeah,
Ah,
oh, yeah.
Well,
That's why.
Are we getting any direction from the state on this? Are they starting to get a little heavy with us on making sure that these stations are required in our county?
I haven't heard or
No.
seen any
Okay.
pressure like that.
Well, they're
Okay.
gonna have to if we meet all their 2035 requirements. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not
they
gonna be any
will.
other
Got to
way.
be charging
They will,
stations somewhere.
definitely.
Well, on that, you said this is how it's currently written. This isn't currently in code.
Not in the, no, it's, yeah, it's just in the draft.
And
Okay.
what's currently in the code is the incentive that, it's not in the slide, but there is an incentive that we currently have in our ordinance, and that is, an incentive to reduce the required number of parking spaces by 2 spaces is available for parking areas requiring 50 or more spaces when an electric vehicle charging space, device is provided to serve a minimum of 2 vehicles.
Right.
That's what we have currently.
Okay, and when I did a groundbreaking a year or two back for a charging station here in Prince Frederick, SMECO, I believe, told us that they really don't ever anticipate to get their money back out of that, the install costs. They'll make money on the sale of the electricity, but the install cost is so astronomical that, and to have like Commissioner Hart said, a pizza parlor have to put in 4 of those. That can make or break the development.
I'm not
Right.
disagreeing with you. I think that these are
Right.
good points to bring up.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends our slides on parking, and we're gonna move on to Article 28, landscaping. And this article includes provisions for the selection, installation, and maintenance of landscaping, minimum planting sizes and species diversity requirements, parking lot perimeter and interior landscaping, landscaping for buffer areas between non-compatible uses, site landscape and screening for ancillary uses, and incentives for the protection of monument trees. So species diversity requirements have been added to the draft zoning ordinance. Diversity among required plant material is required for visual interest and to reduce the risk of losing a large population of plants due to disease. Table 28-1 indicates the percentage of diversity required based on the total quality or quantity of species being used. For example, if a development requires 45 canopy trees, no more than 18 trees or 40% can be of one species, and there must be a minimum of 5 different species within the 45 trees. However, street trees are exempt from these species diversity requirements.
Well, on species diversity, do we have a limit on what trees are allowed to be planted? Can they plant any tree?
Well, invasive trees certainly aren't allowed.
Invasive trees
Um,
aren't.
And I
Are we
believe,
restricted to native trees?
I believe, is it at 75%? 75% is the requirement that needs to be native.
75% is native. Thank you.
So parking lot interior landscape, these requirements have been revised in the draft zoning ordinance. All parking lots of 16 or more spaces are required to have parking lot interior landscape in the draft. In the current zoning ordinance, landscaping is required within all parking lots having more than 25 spaces. Parking lot islands, landscape with trees, are required between every 8 parking spaces in a continuous row in the draft. In the current zoning ordinance, an equivalent of 1 parking lot island landscape with trees is required for every 20 spaces. So the regulations for buffer areas have been revised. Buffer areas are, in the draft zoning ordinance, buffer areas are required between the side and or rear setbacks and property lines where a multifamily or townhouse development abuts a single family or duplex development. And buffer areas must be a minimum of 20 feet in width, and 1 canopy tree or evergreen tree shall be planted for every 40 linear feet or buffer area length. 1 understory tree must be planted evenly spaced between canopy or evergreen trees. And as part of the landscape plan approval, trees may be spaced at various intervals based on specific site requirements, but the total number of trees planted must be no less than 1 canopy or evergreen tree and every 1 understory tree per 40 linear feet of buffer area length. And where non-residential use is adjacent to an existing residentially used property, a property with an active residential building permit, or property with a non-compatible use, the buffer area shall be a minimum of 40 feet in width. 2 staggered rows of evergreen trees are required within the buffer area. And as part of the landscape approval, trees may be spaced at various intervals based on the specific site requirements. But the total number of trees planted shall be no less than 2 per 40 linear feet of buffer area length. And in the draft zoning ordinance, there are additional provisions for the design of all buffer areas. Evergreen shrubs must be planted and spaced sufficiently to form a continuous linear hedgerow at plant maturity. And existing mature, native, and healthy trees in the buffer area may count towards the buffer area tree requirement, and that credit is on a 1-to-1 ratio, 1 existing tree for 1 proposed tree.
If a person didn't want to put any of this in, how would they just apply to have it ignored or not applied to them?
Do you want to handle that one?
We don't have it written into for there to be an exemption from the buffer area requirement at this time, but, we can always revisit that.
Okay.
And add it in if that is something that is.
I was just picturing having buildings right next to each other with no greenery or trees between them at all. That's why I was wondering if there was a methodology or a way to where a property could not abide by it at all.
Well, we don't require, this is not required for same use. If you
Right.
have same use or similar use side by side,
Gotcha.
this is not necessary, but it's more for, differing uses to have a buffer.
Okay, thank you.
And In section 28-7A, site landscaping provisions were added to the draft zoning ordinance, which include landscaping requirements for the area between buildings and the street and parking areas for townhouse, multifamily, and non-residential developments. And a planting area is required along 60% of the area between the building and the street or parking area to include canopy trees, understory trees, shrubs, perennials, ornamental grasses, etc. So this would be another strengthening of the landscaping requirements compared to the current regulations. And the street landscaping section has been revised in the draft. Under the current zoning ordinance, the street tree planting requirements for residential and non-residential development differ slightly. Under the proposed draft requirements, they are more uniform, and it is made clear that tree plantings are required on both sides of the road. And the following provision has been added to the draft. Tree species that bear fruit or nuts are prohibited.
Will, I understand the thought process behind that, but there are some trees that don't bear fruit or nuts that are probably more dangerous than the fruit and nut trees. Sweet gum, for instance, it's listed on the native plant list, but the pods from balls from a sweet gum, and we have them in some of the county facilities already, so it's almost necessary for someone to review the landscape plan to make sure that what's being proposed, even though it's not a fruit bearer or a nut bearer, still won't cause a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think that any tree that's planted, it's in the interest of both the public and the developer to plant something that's going to be, healthy for the overall development. So I would agree with you there. And I think the last bullet I have, there are incentives to incorporate monument trees within required landscaping in this article, but the following provision was also added to ensure their protection throughout the entire county. And then, for those who aren't aware, the ordinance defines a monument tree as one or more of the following: a national, state, or local champion tree, a tree having a diameter of at least 24 inches, or a tree having a diameter that is at least 75% of the diameter of the current state champion tree of that species. So this provision is, if a monument tree is removed without permit approval, it shall be considered a violation, and a fine of $10,000 may be imposed for each violation.
So Will, how many locations of street landscaping are going to be able to adequately support a monument tree?
So I'm sorry for any confusion. That provision, it's on one side just to not have to create a new slide for that one monument tree provision, but that monument tree provision wouldn't just apply to a site design. It would be applicable across the county.
Oh, everywhere. But in street landscaping, nobody would do that.
I apologize. What was the question again?
I said, if someone were doing street landscaping, they wouldn't plant monument trees.
Well, not unless they went back in time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, sorry.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Walked into that one.
It's been a long week. I feel like a monument.
Close.
I am a monument according to Mike Hart.
It's late.
Okay,
Thanks, buddy.
on that note, I think we're ready for a summary. So Article 26, providing outdoor lighting that is dark sky friendly, added to the purpose section. Revisions made based on recommendations from county staff with expertise in outdoor lighting. Article 27, provisions added for parking structures, revisions to off-street loading requirements, revisions to bicycle parking requirements, provisions for electric vehicle charging stations revised. And Article 28, added species diversity requirements, strengthened parking interior landscape requirements, and strengthened buffer area landscape requirements, and added site landscaping requirements. So I think there's already been a little bit of discussion already, but I think at this time, staff requests that the commissioners continue the discussion on the draft articles we just reviewed and direct staff regarding any recommended considerations or options to include in the draft for public input.
So, Will, I do have one more question for you. Back on slide 7, parking spaces. Was that just for places of worship, or did we get broaden the spectrum on that?
That was specific toward, that's just one example of one of the few that was revised at this stage in the process.
And you're gonna look at all of them
Correct.
to see what we can reduce and,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
So EV charging stations, in my head, I can't come to, because, you know, as Commissioner Ireland said, by 2035, we're supposed to be all electric. And is it something that market's gonna drive? I mean, is a business gonna look at, if I don't have charging stations, you know, people with electric vehicles aren't gonna come to my business, so they can't charge their car while they're there shopping? I mean, I'm not sure it's something that we need to require. I guess that's what I'm struggling with.
Isn't there a new requirement that came through for new residential homes that you have to have an EV station in your home to get the permit now? When did that come about? Mary Beth, I see you shaking your head there.
I know there was legislation proposed last year, sorry, Mary Beth, Director of Planning and Zoning. John, did that pass? The EV charging stations in the building code, I know it was proposed, I can't remember if it passed, I don't,
I was told it went through last week.
oh, last week?
No,
Oh.
well, Mako, is that where you heard it?
I believe that's where I heard it.
I know it was proposed, and I honestly can't tell you if it passed, but we'll find out. Thank you.
So the reason I was going there, I believe they said just in a new house, I believe they said it was gonna add another $2,700 roughly to the expense just for the hookup for the EV car. So, I mean, that's just a number and that's already in a house, you know, where you have power supply there, you're not running it through a parking lot. So they are gonna be quite costly, as Commissioner Hart said.
So as Will mentioned, we do have an incentive today. We could leave it an incentive, or we can make it a requirement. So we can absolutely bring 2 options forward in the second draft for further discussion after doing some research and finding out what the state's requiring.
Well, can you look into the future and give us a good answer, please?
If I could do that, I think that there's about 1 million other things I might look into first, but
Yeah, I would agree.
I'll keep that in my thoughts.
Thanks.
And Mary Beth, aren't we, not to get too far off subject, aren't we looking at safety issues of location of charging stations? We've been working with the fire departments.
I think it was more so the uses that are being charged.
Okay.
So I don't know that we specifically talked about, it was the batteries, the storage of the batteries and what can happen with those when you're charging. Yes,
But that won't be part of zoning.
no.
Will, if you make another presentation using this PowerPoint, just maybe a slight suggestion, separate landscape, or street landscape and monument trees to avoid any confusion by other people.
Because I'm
You know,
planting
they
trees.
you know, they just gotta just keep working you, don't
Yeah,
they?
they do.
You know?
It's a farmer in me. I'm planting
Yeah.
all the time.
You mess up one time and we're never gonna let you forget.
Your day is coming.
Well, it's been plenty.
I'm good, commissioners.
I'm good.
I'm good.
We're good.
Any other questions? We're good.
Okay, thank you. I'll just, there's a couple bullets I wanted to read off. So, we have, right now we have a public forum scheduled for tomorrow, right here at the HEB, where we'll be discussing Article 25, and that's site development and design standards. And the next joint work session, where we'll be discussing Article 25 with the commissioners, is scheduled for January 17th. And I believe that that's a wrap for me.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Will.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I believe that brings us to public comment. Mr. County Attorney, do you have to read some rules?
Thank you, sir. Checking the Zoom link. I don't see anybody online. Excuse me, I believe there are some folks here tonight who'd like to make public comment. And you may make your way up to the microphone. The board adopted a resolution in 1989 intending to maintain the order and decorum of the governmental process. A copy is found on the table. By Resolution 51-20, persons are welcome to address the Board of County Commissioners on any matter germane to the business of county government. Persons addressing the board are asked to refrain from statements or remarks or conduct that is uncivil, rude, vulgar, profane, or otherwise disruptive to the conduct of the board's business. All speakers must identify themselves, and whether speaking as an individual, will you be allocated 2 minutes, or as the appointed spokesperson of a group, will you be allocated 5? For those attending virtually, we have none. So please, anyone who would like to make public comment.
My name is Bob Estes. I'm speaking for myself, and I want to support your comment, buddy, on, Commissioner Hance, on
Buddy's fine.
Impervious surfaces. But I thought maybe you'd enjoy hearing a number that if you have an acre of pervious surface that absorbs the water, 1 inch, you are going to get something along the lines of 750 gallons of water running off. So most of it gets absorbed. If it's impervious, 27,000 gallons. To put a little bit of reality to that, it's not a small thing to worry about. It's so I applaud your comment because this is real stuff. Thank you. And then you know where it goes, where we don't want it to, basically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James McQueen. I just want to bring up a couple comments on EV stations. Where I travel a bit, so up north, the gas stations are putting them in. They're putting them in because the people got to sit there a while, and while they're there, they'll eat, they'll do that. So like Wawa and those places are putting the EVs in, and then they're putting generators right next door to make sure it runs off diesel. So one of my comments, if you're looking at EVs, I mean, I really would study some of the numbers that are coming out of Detroit, because they're all reducing the building of EVs right now. Because the cost of an EV is so much higher, and the cost of charging an EV is actually getting higher to the point where it'll be higher than gasoline. So there is a lot going on in that world. I have family that has EV, and I watch what they do and how it works. And for going back and forth to work, it works great, because work usually has one if you go to a federal building. If you drive back home, it's fine. But if you go on a trip and stuff like that, that's where things start becoming an issue. And one company called Toyota sells hybrids, and they're doing better in the sales than EVs, because you still got gas in the tank. So just wanted to let you know, as you're looking at this, don't put it on us. Let's put it back on the businesses out there. If you want to build a gas station, you build EV with it. That way the market can, whoever's there can use it, and they can go do something. They can spend some money while they're waiting, instead of sitting in the car for 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Myra Gowans. I'm Calvert Citizens United, and I'm speaking on their behalf tonight. I just want to compliment you all, the board, for your motion and how you handled everything down in First District. I think that was appropriate. I think it was best for the environment, and the citizens were gratified that you all stood up for what you campaigned on. And Commissioner Cox, when I sat here the other night when we were there and you were voting, you said, "You've seen this, haven't you?" And I said, "You're talking to me?" And you said, "Yes." And I said, "Yes, I've seen it." And it's the comprehensive plan. And then you read, you know, the back page, you read a couple things. And that is preserve the rural landscape and create supporting growth and have good growth in the county. And then I thought I should share with you, I just want to share with you, when about a week before we passed and adopted the comprehensive plan, we had our last meeting, the county did, county commissioners had their last hearing with the public at the senior center over in Prince Frederick. And 400 people attended. 85 people spoke at that meeting. And I just want to respectfully share with you, 11 people were in favor of this kind of false flag dialogue that they put in here. And everybody else spoke out in defense that they didn't want to see massive growth, massive development to support the growth. I also want to let you know that in the time that I've been involved with Calvert Citizens United, and we were in the lawsuit, I called Peterson Companies. They used to be a client of mine years and years ago. And I called and talked to him, and they own National Harbor, where MGM is and everything else up at the bridge. They struggled for that property for 11 years before they could even get a footprint on the property. And here's what I think you need to know. I called Mr. Peterson, told him, and I said, explain to me why you're not coming down. The commissioners invited you. You were in the meeting. You were in the county commissioner meeting. You showed plats. You talked to them about this major build-out down here. And he said, Myra, I want you to call and talk to my development director. So I did, called him. He spoke to me. And this is what he said. I asked him, I said, give me just 2 reasons why you didn't come down. 2 reasons. They are begging you to come. They're going to give you carte blanche, whatever you desire. The builders and developers down here are buying property, putting it under letters of intent, and they're going to flip that property to you. And he said to me, I said, just tell me, is it the sewer? Is it the road construction? 2 lanes north and south. He said to me, I'm going to tell you the truth. The reasons we didn't come are too numerous to document. Now, that's developer speak. I've worked with developers all my life, 40 years I've worked with them. It's developer speak for these people don't even know what the hell we need to come down there. They're saying, come on down. And it was the builders and developers that invited them to come and talk to you all about this. Our county, Mark, is the smallest county in Maryland, but it's the 6th smallest county in the entire United States. That's how fragile we are. And that is why people, the citizens, are very, very concerned. The ones that have moved here and come to have a wonderful life in this magnificent community, and the old line countyans who want to preserve it for their kids, grandkids, and their generations to come. So that's what I wanted to tell you. I wanted to let you know that not everybody agrees with how this was written, okay? So, and I appreciate your time and your patience with me. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'll be glad to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room? Still don't see anybody else on Zoom, but there were 2 bills that passed regarding electric vehicles that I think might be of interest to both the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning Commission. The first pertains to residential properties, and reading from the fiscal note, Bill requires the construction of new housing unit to include in or on the garage, carport, or driveway, one dedicated parking space with electric vehicle supply equipment that is fully installed, or number two, one EV-ready parking space. The bill further requires the Maryland Energy Administration to study the cost of requiring EV-ready and EV-SE installed parking spaces at multifamily residential buildings and related issues, and they're to report their findings back as of December 1, 2023, so that date has passed. They did say that the local impact was going to be none, that the county would enforce this, and it wouldn't cost the state any extra money, if you can imagine that. The other bill is the one that had to do with the medium and heavy-duty equipment. I don't think that is the focus of the zoning ordinance, but it's an administration bill that modifies two transportation sector programs funded by the Strategic Energy Investment Fund and modifies the authorized use of certain alternative compliance payments deposited in the SEIF. It basically means the governor has to put in his budget for the next several years the purchase of electric vehicles that are medium or heavy duty equipment. And local government may benefit from the bill's changes, according to the fiscal map. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Attorney. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you that came out tonight and participated, and we greatly appreciate your participation and hope you continue that. At this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. The Board of County Commissioners.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Madam Chair, it's yours.
If I could have a motion to take a brief recess, and then we will return for our regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
By Commissioner Tui, and then seconded by Commissioner Kernan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm glad you're still next to me.
Right, thank you.